Hello everyone, welcome to today's episode. Recently, the past week I've been a bit out of it, sharing these episodes, but an interesting idea approached me that I felt it deserves to be spoken about. And in today's episode, I've made some notes, and I'm just going to focus on these notes and expand them. So the episode title is Observations on Theological Mysteries. And I thought about, at least it's been like a week where my attention has gone on what is the meaning of life that surpasses language. First of all, theology in the 6th century and earlier, the Abrahamic traditions, monotheistic religions, presented themselves into the world. And you can imagine that there were people in villages Imagine simple people living simple lives, and suddenly a very profound event and story finds them. And so this story has echoed until now, and it is part of a percentage of the population's life. And it's a sensitive topic, they say don't talk about politics and religion, but I feel that if they are important, if something is important, it's also important that we take our attention to it and in some sense understand it, There's something they say that in life you can either fear something or you can attempt to understand your fear, which is confronting it. And I feel that the world, when we look at people, if you were to just see people walking around in this world, it's like the Matrix screen. I'm bringing Matrix into this, but it's like the movie Matrix, where inside the Matrix it was people, but outside of the Matrix it was like code on a computer screen. And that analogy struck a chord with me, because it's as if the code on the screen is the thoughts and the ideas that people have that motivate them throughout the day. What I'm trying to say is that the world, before we spoke, was just a natural event, physical event. But when human beings began moving on to language, as if there was idol worship, where an object was being truth, and once we surpassed the object, a subject began becoming truth. And human beings, they're not just living objective lives. The type of subject they are, the way they understand their world, that's all in a subjective domain. So when one speaks about theology, I am commenting on a type of story, a type of narrative that is becoming a framework for the world in which individuals are living through. So think of it this way, that there is one, like a multiplayer online game, when we all wake up in the day, we are in one physical world, one physical map, and at the same time, every individual has a different experience of this map, and it's as if like one world, one physical world, but 8 billion subjective worlds, on this physical world. And some people's inner narrative, some people's eyes, their subjective life, their inner life, sometimes it coordinates with outer events. We call those people materialists. And those people who they feel there's something else going on, the continental philosophers were really holding the flag for this in academics, but people who feel there's something more going on, it's as if their inner story of their inner life is not completely matching the outer realms in regards to just its physical properties, and those people are considered as immaterialists. Now, theology is an attempt to study religion, and of course there's many religions. But the Abrahamic religions share a very unique story, and this story first of all, I'm not a theologian, but as a human being, as a member of this species, I feel that from my corner of the universe, maybe I can share some insights, and people who know what to do with these insights may they be blessed to take it further. So, I've written here, it's everywhere if it's truth, as the first point I want to talk about. So, I'll say this, that when we look at the story of theology, the story of God, it's as if God created man out of clay, and he imbued man with his own breath, and he commanded man to exist. This is very crucial. That man was commanded. It was as if a vocal intention turned animate. As if somebody's saying something and it becomes reality. So man was made, and when man was made, all the angels were sent to bow to man. And one of the angels did not bow. That ends up becoming the fallen angel, where when it was in heaven, the name was Lucifer. When it falls down, we call it devil and whatever. Now, but the most important thing is that there was God, and there was God's angels, and then there was man. And then everything that is starting for man begins from what man does. And so man is, in some sense, tricked by the serpent. Adam and Eve make the mistake of taking the fruit of knowledge as if they were told not to do something, and they did it. And it was as if the first mistake of existence from the theological perspective. Now, something interesting that I've heard is that they say that the archetype of the angel is that it doesn't have free will, and it's that the angel is, in some sense, the will of God. So it's as if God is the sun, and its emanations, its light beams are like the angels, And so the angel doesn't have free will, but man does. That's the thing about the human being. And now, as the story progresses, man makes the mistake, and he falls down, and he falls into this world. And this brings up the question of, first of all, where is Earth from the theological framework, from the religious point of view? That means, where did God create Earth? If it was God and only the heavens. But also, to elaborate the point that the angel listens to the will of God, man has free will, and man is in this world, in some sense, being tested by the divine will and being watched by this archetype of the Father, God. So, one thing where I've said, what did I say? It's everywhere if it's truth. People look at life and they feel it's God's will that is moving everything. If you live in a religious country, in my youth I had the privilege of, I was born in Iran. It was a theocratical society, And so in a religious community, for example, imagine there's a kid and he does a backflip in like a busy marketplace, and then like a store owner or something says mashallah, right? That means look at what God's will is doing now. Do you know? So it's this view that if everything is God, what is man? You know, what is man's movement? What is this notion that we are moving ourselves if there is a greater mover to things? The next point I've written here is that love is God's ladder. And I've written here, love was bestowed to man as a connection and ladder to God, the divine reality. Even the Lucifer, I'm making a note here to the show, to the show where it's as if it's like, you know, even the archetype, the fallen archetype through love finds a way back to God. So it's as if human beings they descended from their heavenly position, and it's as if a way back to that heavenly position is through piety and through love, you know. It's as if like the only ladder extended. Now there's a reason, guys, I'm sharing these points. There's like it's like a bunch of horizontal lines, then at the end there's going to be a vertical line going through all of them. So then I've written, is evil part of God's will if everything is? So I guess this notion that man is on earth and through the love of truth, in some sense through love, he ascends, and he has a way, he has a connection to the Creator, the created connection to the Creator. Now in this world we find it, there is a duality of chaos and order. This chaos and order, certain chaotic things we consider to be evil, certain ordered things we consider to be good. You know, people do something bad, they have the sense of regret. People do something good, they feel energized, for example. Now, going back to the idea that the angels are the divine will, and how in religion there's this association to the archetype of, for example, Satan or the devil, you know, in regards to the concept of evil, it's as if everything is God's will, then in some sense is evil God's will. Do you know? Something of the sort, you know? As if some people say, it's like, how could this world be so cruel? And at the same time, it's as if, what if this cruelty is part of how the film is being directed, you know? Usually the film director, if you take the analogy of a film, the film director is not in the film. It's outside of the film, kind of telling some of that main actors what to do you know? And if the director doesn't like the shot, you know, he in some sense says cut, and they do a retake. And in certain religious texts, for example, in the Quran, there's this saying that it says as if it's like there were generations of people before you, and these people did not listen to the divine will, and they were wiped out, you know, something of the sort. By the way, something I forgot to mention at the beginning, Aristotle says it's the sign of an educated mind to entertain an idea without accepting it. In order for us to have freedom to speak, we have to have a distance from the design and geometry of the concepts we hear. So when I'm talking in this episode, if a person's getting emotional, it's because they are attached to the geometry of the idea. But I'm telling you, it's as if when listening, or a great way to listen is in some sense as if you're looking at someone designing something on the table and you're looking at it. And you can also notice that the designer is not the design, you know. So anyways, be mindful, this episode is a bit different than the usual episodes. But anyways, this notion that there is this divine will, this intelligence through the universe, and through the religions it was personified to the degree that as if we say God was made in the image of man, but there are some people who feel that, man was made in the image of God, but there's some people, you can say, who they think God was made in the image of man, and this kind of divides the atheist and the theist, you know. Here I've written another note that when you love yourself, perhaps God has finally learned to love himself. You know, there is this Swami Krishnananda where he says religion is God remembering himself. That means it's like the realization that there is God in the room. It's as if like, what is man? What is creaturehood? You know, when there is something greater that is living, it's as if like the same time that people are living, it's as if there is truth living through them all at the same time. So, in my observations, you know, especially last night where I decided to give a talk on this, I was sitting having a cigarette. I have this garden bench I ordered from Amazon in my balcony, and I was sitting on it late at night smoking, and I was like, okay, let me think for a moment from the theological framework. Let's just say that it's as if the religious story is the only truth, you know. Just like an actor has an ability to change roles, for a moment my mind to just change the role of everything, and I was like, okay, let's say that we're all being watched by this superior, by this supremacy, the supreme truth. And I started to think about this notion of being tested. And I was thinking, okay, is it a test of the body? And actually, I forgot I moved past something. So guys, just a checkpoint here of me sitting on the bench. And there's another point I've written here. I've written God current. So as I was talking about the divine will, I've connected it to a metaphor of a fish in the ocean. So imagine there's a fish, like sometimes we see certain people who you can say, let's say the prophets in religions, or certain people in unique states, like those enlightened in the Vedic tradition. And so I've said here this concept of the God current as if, like, imagine like in a world of fish. Now imagine the fish have like humanized personalities, okay? And so imagine that one of these fish, like a group of fish are swimming, and then one of the fish just takes a different turn, goes against the crowd, and finds himself suddenly inside a current, and in some sense at an incredibly fast speed finds itself on the other side, not the other side of the ocean, but at a completely different location than the other ones were. And the other fish catch up to it, and they're like, how did you do that, fish? You know, you must be a divine fish, you know? And that fish to itself was just like I was just a simple fish swimming, so it was as if it was a current. And there's something here that we have this notion of God, like in primitive times of idol worship, being an object, then in times of subject worship being a subject, as if something that has a boundary, that has a container, that is static, But if we were to visualize it as a current, okay, and this idea goes beyond personality, as if the divine divinity is a state. It is not a thing, or it's not an object or a subject. It's a state. Now, here I've made another note where I've said that somehow I connect this to Einstein's relativity. Where I've said, it was as if Einstein was saying that if there was a person on a train, and if he was outside, Einstein was outside of a train station, and he wondered about the experience of a person in the train, and the experience of Einstein if there was a light beam that hit outside right beside Einstein, right? And it was as if the experience of the person in the train would be different, than the person outside of the train. Or you can say it in this way, that somebody looks at someone in a train, the train's moving really fast, but to that person in the train, it's like they're still, they can just walk, they can sit. Do you see? So it's as if they are inside a greater movement. Now, if we consider that greater dimensions or movements, they're not like locations. It's like as if paradise is a current. Anyways, the mysteries arise when the moment is more unknown than known. When something happens, for example, what people consider a miracle, it's as if beyond their known expectation, the unexpected happened, In an unknown world, known creatures are asking what they are, where they are, and what does it mean. And now I can go to that moment where I was sitting on the bench last night, and I was thinking about this nature, this as if playing the role, as if, okay, let's say there's a God, a creator, and the person is the created. And so the creator is observing the created, and in some sense there's a test, right? And I wondered, what would this test be about, I'm like, if it was a test of the body, right? Then it would be as if like the body would be in some degree like in the full control of the person. At the same time, the body is temporary. It's as if God, as if there was eyes watching this world from beyond it. Imagine you creating something and it's like beyond just seeing how it works. To me, last night there was this view where I was like, okay, it's not a test of the body. The body is in nature. The body is not, there is a certain range of the body's control, but it's as if like due to the impermanence of the body, it's as if to me it was like, okay, this is not the test. It's too temporary. Then I wondered about the mind. And I wondered, could it be how people are using their minds that is the test? That means it's as if you see, as if God is not judging the lion that's biting the gazelle, but man feels suddenly judged by this creator archetype, right? So then I thought, okay, is it the mind? Could it be that God's judgment, it's as if the test is like how we use our minds? Then I realized that the mind is information, and it's about how the information moves. Do you know? How the information is accumulated, right? So to me, that felt also temporary. It felt as if, okay, let's say it's not a test of the body, and let's say it's not the test of the mind. And then I reached this perspective where I was like, wait a minute, we have come to the idea of the soul. And there was somebody by the name of Ralph Waldo Emerson, where he started this movement of American Transcendentalism, and his disciple was Henry David Thoreau. And so this was a man who went into nature and had realized divinity, had realized the divine in some sense. And in his you can say, system of thought, he had this view that every person has a soul, which is also in the religious narrative, and the soul is an extension of God, right? So it's as if one's relationship with their own soul is their great relationship with God. And imagine all those people throughout the years who, just by having a sort of spiritual context, were seen as blasphemy, but in some sense they were trying to have, let's say, the purest connection to the Creator, Also, something that in the monotheistic traditions that's different, for example, polytheistic traditions, is that in monotheistic traditions, God is a truth that is inconceivable. That means in certain religious texts it is suggested that God has no partner, no person can say, I'm a God. It's as if God is beyond all of this, it is inconceivable. And what's even, a little bit humorous is that every religious person worshiping God is worshiping the inconceivable. They worship monotheistic religions, they're worshiping the inconceivable. So it's as if you are praying to the inconceivable, you're bowing to the inconceivable. And the thing about the soul also, where in certain religious narratives, that the reason they considered even blasphemy was that they said that the soul is the secret of God. And those who go towards it is as if are they saying they're equal to God? Blasphemy, So, as my observations deepened last night, I thought, could it be a test of the soul? In Vedic traditions, they also say that it's like the seer of the seen is unseen. That means there's There's a component to the person's moment of being that is watching both their body and mind at the same time, and it is neither. Which is like a sort of soul, where in the Upanishads people would come and say, hey man, is this truth? And they would say, neti, not this, as if it is not something that can be contained. So, in wondering that if it's a test of the soul, and the soul objects and subjects are temporary, but it's as if like the soul is not. So could it be the test for eternity, not a test for the temporary? As if this whole time we are eternal beings, and there's a temporary framework, as if temporality is the vehicle, and the vehicle for eternity. And it's as if when we identify with the vehicle, suffering, pain, the ups and downs of life. But could it be that this whole time there has just been a sort of eternal beinghood? I've written something here, and this goes to the subtitle, where I've written when God transcends God. So, just to connect it to what I'm saying to this final point, is that if it's a test beyond the body, if it's a test beyond the mind, it could be in some sense a test of how eternity uses its temporary life. Now, I've written here the whole universal intelligence, as if there's stages, and if we were to think of God transcending God, as if let's say if we are said that man is made in the reflection of the Creator, in the image of God, as if we consider that there's a body, there's a mind, there's a soul, the body is 100% known, the soul is 100% unknown, and the mind is like in the middle with a certain changing ratio. So I thought that if there was just like a person realizes they're not just a body, because there's a mind where the free will is active in, and then let's say you're a metaphysicist and you reach a point where you're like, okay, there's something watching the mind before the thoughts that I decide upon or act upon, there is that watcher. So it's as if when you realize you're more than the body, you become a creature of mind. When you realize you're more than mind, you become a creature of soul, or the soul, the creature remembers. It's in some sense a soul. And keep in mind, the soul is like unknown. Now, I thought that, okay, let's have this sort of transcendence staircase. And let's consider that if it was like the whole universal creation, right? As if what we think is like the world is actually like one being, which let's say is God, and so this God is realizing it's more than its body, more than its mind and whatnot, right? So this is what I wrote here. The whole universal intelligence realizes it's beyond the universal intelligence in the same way a person realizes they're not just their body. And in brackets here I've written embodied individuals. Then I've written they are their mind, a sort of collective mind. When they realize they're not a mind and there's a soul that transcends that mind. Here I've written advancement beyond the language threshold, but I've written God realizes it's not a mind, so it's more than God, right? I saw these having a sort of worldly manifestation, as if, let's just say right now, everything is God's will, and so God's will is experiencing its body, which is the world, the physical world, creaturehood, the individual bodyhood, where 8 billion creatures moving on a rock, okay? Now, if we were to consider that the God suddenly realized it is not its body and it's not its mind, it would be as if suddenly, imagine these 8 billion people that consider their bodies suddenly realize they're a collective being. So we are ushered into the era of collective mindhood, where from embodied individuals we went towards a collective mind. Now, when I say the third one, where God realizes it's not a mind, it's as if there is perhaps a future era where we will even transcend collective mindhood. This whole thing of love and various just approaches towards the supernatural, where it's as if oneness, as if people have this notion of like as if everybody's holding hands, and it's like one happy world. But it's as if suddenly you realize you're not your mind, you're not that which is moving the body, as if some force is moving the matter, and then this force realizes it is not the matter, so the attention goes to something else, and it goes to the mind, which is, you can say, the currents that are in some sense moving, roaming the surface of this earth. And in some sense, let's say that after the era of collective mind, when God realizes it's not a soul, that means beyond every conceivable picture, there is something more, there is something beyond. So it's as if right now we are in the phase where God has not understood it is more than its body. Let's say in the next 200 years, to 1,000 years, suddenly we realize like God, if we become collective beings, that means like language may become obsolete when we have one mind. Because then there'd be no reason to say something. People would be experientially communicating in the same moments of the space-time continuum. That means it's like right now I'm sitting here and I'm giving this live stream and people are like hearing it. It's being live streamed in cyberspace. So right now, imagine in the future when I'm saying when God realizes it's not about just a body, it's a mind, it would be a sort of moment where it's as if right now, as I'm sitting here giving this talk, imagine through my eyes, like 8 billion other beings are also looking through them. As if it would be that sort of interconnectivity, when I say collective mind. When I say advancement beyond the language threshold, I feel that the day of the apocalypse may be a suggestion when God realizes it is no longer just a body, no longer just a mind. And it's like the whole world closes its eyes, hold the totality of existence. It's as if the body is a dream. We woke up from that dream and we realize it's a mind, but now we're realizing the mind is a dream. And then let's say the person wakes up to the reality of the soul. And when God realizes it is not a soul, there is no point to any point. There are times where the way things happen on this planet, like I've experienced certain coincidences, certain moments where I'm like, is there something else in the moment moving other than me? Other than just people and their psychologies? as if like some sort of invisible collective mind field in the background of everything that's happening. In the same way a person is dreaming, when they wake up, it's as if they were the dream. They were the dream. They weren't just in a dream having an experience. They were the whole dream. This would be in some sense a surpassing of the universal self. You know, first of all, who knows what will happen here, you know? There's so much of this world that is unknown that even if a person just has certainty in one picture, one photograph of this ever-changing film, it's as if it's like way more than a photograph. When I say advancement beyond the language threshold in my work called Civilization 2.0, I've given talks on this. I've considered that 3,600 years from now, we will be at a point where the species is overpopulating the whole universal sector. Pretty much technology has redeemed us from physiological survival, and the only thing left is for this genetical pattern to spread everywhere. I mean, what other purpose can we see to human life, right? And what's interesting is that if there was no suffering, what boundary? If there was no limitation, what would there be to do? There would be nothing. It would just be like a film where the film is not changing. Imagine filming like a photograph. Like in an art gallery, the camera's there for hours just filming the same photograph, but in some sense the camera is moving. You know, that seems to be more of the reality of the world. So the advancement beyond the language threshold is when we choose to no longer be objects and subjects. That means we completely transition from the era of individual bodyhood and collective mind. Now, I thought that, let's say somebody creates something, let's say somebody creates a simulation, like a cyber simulation, and they go inside, the programmer of the simulation goes inside the program, and it knows everything. It knows what will happen, it knows what it has created, you know, and it's just there, you know. And now let's say something happens in the simulation where God forgets that it's inside its own creation, do you know? Now that programmer suddenly wakes up, suddenly gets a familiarity with the designs of the moment, right? And then the programmer gets out of the simulation of reality and realizes that it was the creator of the world that it experienced. And now, when it's outside of the simulation, it's as if you're done with the simulation. It's as if beyond this world, it's as if the world started and then ended, and then the attention that had started it and ended it moved on, right? Now the idea is, if God transcends God, it's as if there is no longer an attention to even create the world. that the creator is getting bored of its creation, but that it experiences fully its creation and it's done. It could be that we are found in a physical dimension and we're attributing, like we're considering the meaning of all of life through this just physical dimension. But if this whole time there was something more than the physical, that means as I use the metaphor of a multiplayer online game where when we wake up we log in, that means as if, imagine the person sitting behind the screen no longer wants to play the video game. It stands up in its own greater reality, but now let's say from that greater reality it wants to surpass it, and the only way to surpass it is that it's as if once God has realized it's God, there is no longer a God to be God, you know. It's as if truth wakes up from the illusion, and then it realizes it is truth, and then what is left is the more, the beyond again. And so that's the end of my notes, guys. I guess I'll just say some things and then end it. Even though I'm talking about God as if transcending itself, as if just like a person realizes they are a soul, as if they are their whole moment of being rather than the contents in it only, you know, something unique happens. You know, it's as if you find a comfort and contentment to watch and also to create. You know, creativity could be a sign of a dimension that has been fully observed, and when something is fully observed, the person finds contentment. This is how we surpass fear. If someone hasn't done something, they will fear it. The moment they do it, they have experiential dimensions that add understanding, and that understanding allows the free will to have a sense of control. Now, I was thinking, if it's a test for souls, and if souls are in some sense God, the extension of God, so is God testing himself? And so man and the mind of man is like forever the illusion, right? Because you know what I'm saying? I'm like that guy saying, like, you know, isn't it strange that while we're all being individuals, there's this idea that this whole thing could be one being. That means what's behind, what's looking through our eyes, through the eyes of one person, through the eyes of a dolphin, you know, through, you know, the antenna of an ant, you know, it becomes something where it's as if it's like one being. That means it's like it's a rock in the middle of nowhere, and imagine like this invisible cloud comes and overlays as if the atmosphere is alive and we're all being the atmosphere. Do you know? But just this notion that it's like the same time visible individuals are living, an invisible collective could be simultaneously living, you know. And that invisible collective is having too much fun, let's say, in just being on the object realm, object level of things, and it suddenly realizes its own nature, you know, realizes that it surpasses the temporary. So in some sense it would be this implication that, as I mentioned earlier, where is earth? Where did God create earth? As if earth is in heaven. Everything that is made is still in heaven, as if God created earth, but earth was created in what was there before. Do you know? So it's as if the species going from being temporary creatures bound to fear through surpassing the mind and understanding the soul. You know, and through the soul it would be for the first time where it's as if every person would have a sort of contentment with the changes of their body, changes of their personality, upon the realization that there's a watcher that surpasses the self that is the creation of the two. This week that's gone by, it has been a very unique week for me. My inner realms have changed, and I have just reverted to a simpler state of my own being, where it's as if like I was looking at this plant in nature, and I'm like, wow, this whole time that we try to give this plant like a framework, structure, levels of symbolism and geometry to it, it's just something that's happening. That means this whole time we're in a world where it's nature is nature, where in some sense there is no, like a lion doesn't need an explanation to be a lion, a bird doesn't need to be explained that it's a bird. The way nature is designed, it's like by its design, it is the expression of its nature. It's the world inside a world through language, and then that world ends up we're driving the first car, the first vehicle. So that's the thing, where it's as if I've spent a very long time giving these talks throughout the years, and who knew I would reach a day where I'd be like, it's just like plants, It's as if nature is, is taking it, is happening in a more simpler way than the complexity of, what the human mind has produced is trying to capture. So, all of this made me feel as if, it could be that human life, this individualness that we're experiencing, it's a phase. It's a phase of the remembrance of truth, that it could never be the illusion. There was a time where I would say sometimes I've had these panic attacks, philosophically inspired panic attacks, where I was, there was a time where I'm like, have I opened my eyes in a world where I'm going to die in? Do you know? That means it's like it was such a heavy idea for me that it's as if, why show someone something so magnificent, so infinite, so vast, yet the person can experience it, let's say, max for 100 years. It on some level, to me, it felt like, is this a sort of punishment? As if, like, imagine somebody is sitting and you put a lot of food in front of them, but they can only eat like a very little bit of the food, right? And the person's like, why am I seeing all these other foods here, But then, my mentality went to a point where I'm like, okay, it's like, who am I? This world is so vast, and we're such a small part of it. That means to have an expectation to even want to understand it would be like an infinite. It's as if like the world is designed for an immortal being, to be explored, but we are mortal beings, mortal creatures. Right, so there is like a theological clue there, like why this design, why such space to move in, but little ability to move in the space. And then I thought that it's as if the reality was seen as multidimensional, then it's as if what doesn't make sense from, let's say, a 2D perspective makes sense to a 3D. Imagine there's this idea of the Flatlanders, where it's like, a town of squares on a table, and then suddenly this cube arrives, and this person puts this cube, this unknown hand puts this cube on the table of Flatland, and all the squares who are in the two-dimensional world, they're like, yo, where did this square arrive from, And then suddenly that person takes the cube and moves it to somewhere else of Square Town, and suddenly of the Flatland, and suddenly it's as if people are like, no way did that person just teleport. But it was as if the whole time there was a multidimensional framework to the picture. It's as if what we don't understand in 2 dimensions, it's like understood in 3 dimensions, and it's like what we don't understand there is found in greater dimensions, right? So this whole time that we're trying to live as just individuals, imagine in a sort of humanized flatland of our own, there is greater dimensions that are active and working, and to understand those, it's if there suddenly you can see this idea of like surrender and sacrifice, that is like a religious theme. And it's as if people think it's a physical sacrifice, like the Mayans and Aztecs felt it was a physical sacrifice, but in some sense it is not a physical sacrifice. It is the sacrifice of your past, your known past, for the unknown future. When a person realizes life is simpler than language suddenly may feel hollow. A person may suddenly feel that we all created the stories of the world, yet we're just on a rock hovering in the middle of nowhere. And it's like the purpose of this nowhere, a sort of tribe. It's like the purpose of life wouldn't be, this is again me going on a tangent, but like the purpose of life, I would say, if it was just physical, we would be immortal beings. If the purpose was of the mind, we would have a greater mind, than this, a way more continuous mind. But if it's designed for a soul, as if this whole time we have been walking in an art gallery, which is like, it's as if we are the thoughts of the Creator, as if we are the imagination of God right now. And in any instant, the person can shift their attention and the imagination can change. Anyways, guys, this world is truly a mystery, and as theology is an interpretation of this mystery, it also has multiple mysteries. There's so many ways to look at the world where it's like an all-you-can-eat buffet of information, all-you-can-consume buffet of data. I feel that if there is a multidimensional truth here, it is waiting to remember itself, and upon the remembrance of itself, it doesn't need to be fixed in where it is. It's as if you suddenly realize you have an appointment, and it doesn't matter where you are, you just get out of that environment and go to the appointment, and it's as if like a sort of eternal state, that it's like we are too focused on the temporary to notice, but upon noticing, perhaps that is the passing of the test, And even if it was unknown, let's say it's happening through dimensions beyond our ability to perceive, how many people are willing to even go beyond the human framework, Right now, I would say I am living at a time in 2021 where the linguistic simulation is like at its peak. But I feel that future generations of philosophers will be able to experience, or they may experience, an event where I would say it's the apocalypse of language, where suddenly beyond language, greater dimensions of how the real is being real are noticed. And it's like this notion of the divine will, where like the angel can't do anything other than God's will. It feels to me that human beings that, for example, they engage in the act of prayer or worship or a sort of routine, daily routine of behavior, a sort of ceremonial approach to their life and truth. It's as if that ceremonial approach is trying to be an angel of the narrative, of the text, right? So it's as if you take something as true, it's as if your attention is fully on that, and anything outside of that suddenly becomes untruthful. But if truth is the one looking rather than what is being looked at, and the one looking, in some sense, realizing it's more than its eyes. It's as if we're all waiting for an intelligent universe to wake up to itself. And when it does, it's as if suddenly eternal remembrance is restored. Many people say, why are you here? It's like to do things in the world, but perhaps we're here to be the world. And once we are the world, then it's like the next stage of realizing you're more than what you're being. It could be that at the same time we are breathing, so is the universe. Anyways, guys, thank you for listening. And to be honest, I have this feeling where I don't know what's going to happen to the future of these talks. Sometimes I wonder if the world needs a mirror or not. But one thing I would say is for certain is that consciousness is where reality begins. And if we are to wonder about the beginning of our intelligence, we will have a greater chance to understand it. A beginning more than time, just an experiential beginning. That means any person who wakes up in the morning, if you can become fascinated with how your eyes are even here in a world, in the world's room, then the mysteries of reality shall be revealed to you. It could be that fascination is the key to the divine door. Anyways, guys, thank you for listening, and much blessings and namaste.